So good morning, everyone. My name is Heather Kinsey, and I'm joining you from the Strive Group in Anchorage, Alaska. With me today are two guests. We have Burt and Sabrina Peterson. Today's topic is specifically on the CARES Act and how it affects retirement. And I'd love to tell you a little bit about that to give you an overview, but to be honest, this is way past my mental capacity, hence the need for Burt and Sabrina Peterson joining us today. I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping and then I'll turn it over to the experts. So the first bit of housekeeping is we do daily webinars Monday through Friday. You can visit our website, thestrivegroup.com, for our daily programming. If you have an idea for a future topic, or if you have questions specific to our experts, you can email those questions to info@thestrivegroup.com. Just a little heads up, both Sabrina and Joe's contact information will be at the last slide at the end of this webinar, and so you can always feel free to email them directly as well. But if it's specific to our programming or a general question about how our daily webinars work, feel free to email those directly to me at info@thestrivegroup.com. The last bit of housekeeping before I turn it over to Joe and Sabrina is the chat pod. On the right-hand side of your screen is a chat function. Feel free to text in or type in any questions you have about the topic being presented today. I will pop back into the webinar. I'll gently interrupt either Sabrina or Joe and ask them your question on your behalf. If it gets close to the 11 o'clock hour and you have a burning question, I ask that you please make sure your email address is written with the question, because I might not be able to get to you on air, and that way I'll have a way to contact you directly and to hook you up with Sabrina or Joe, depending on who the best expert would be to answer that question or to address that issue. So that's the only housekeeping that I have. I don't want to waste any of Sabrina and Joe's time. So again, this is Sabrina Peterson and Burt, and take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Heather. Very excited to be here today and have this opportunity to share with you a little bit about the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act that was passed on March 27th. There's a lot of questions that happen to pop up every day with regards to the provisions that came along with this new law. And so we thought we would address some of those today and some of the more popular questions that we receive. The very first one we thought we would jump in today is the disadvantages or just of COVID-19 distribution and loan provisions to a retirement plan. As many of you know, there are some really big changes to the ability that participants have to obtain a loan or distribution. Loans were doubled, so the amount that a participant can take in a loan has doubled, as has the amount of a distribution that a participant can obtain. So now that those amounts have been increased substantially, in fact, upwards of $100,000 can a participant take as a distribution or loan, the question is it in their best interest? Is there a disadvantage to allowing that to happen? And the biggest question, or the biggest, I guess, answer to that would be only if the participant really needs it, would it be good for them. But in the long term, we have to think about their retirement assets overall, and keeping in mind that we've used these assets, or we've protected these assets for so many years to be there for retirement. And just by giving those participants the ability to take that $100,000 loan or distribution doesn't necessarily mean that it's in their best interest. There might be a substantial need for a participant to take such a high loan or a high distribution, but I think there's more of a want to take that distribution than anything else. And so we have to be careful that we don't allow too many assets to leak out of the plan, not because people needed the money, but because they just wanted to take that much money out of the plan. The CARES Act allows for those distributions to be taken, as I said, up to $100,000 without the 10% early withdrawal penalty. And those taxes that are due on those distributions can be spread over 3 years. So it's a very attractive way to take a substantial amount of money out of a retirement program. So the real disadvantage is that you could see a lot of leakage of retirement assets out of their account that would have benefited them substantially long term. So only if there's a real need for those dollars does it really make sense for a participant to take those. The other question that we oftentimes get is there any action that I have to take? Do I need to adopt these provisions? Do I have to amend my plan? The answer is the plan does need to be amended so that the operations of your plan, the way that you're doing your daily operations, conform with what the law actually says. The adoption of these new rules or the adoption of this amendment needs to be done by the end of 2022. So there's really no rush to go out and have your plan document revised or amended to take on these new provisions. So you've got plenty of time to do that. And another question we often receive is, if I don't offer loans right now, am I allowed to add loans so that a participant can take up to $100,000 or 100% of their vested account balance? And the answer is, you can always add loans. It's a discretionary provision. It's a discretionary amendment to your provisions of your plan. So you can always add it. And if you do in the next 180 days, those loan payments will be deferred until the end of this year, and one additional year will be extended to the term loan. So that makes it a little bit easier for the participant to pay back that loan over time. Sabrina, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, and I wanted to kind of touch on the automatic, whether provisions are added automatically. And what I'm finding is when I'm looking at different vendors that employers are working with, whether they be on the investment side or like yourself, a third-party administrator, some are being more proactive about these provisions. So they send you an email and say, if you don't reply by a certain date, we're taking that as a negative consent and we will automatically add them. In other cases, the plan sponsor needs to request the information and ask to add it in, or they'll get an email that says, if you don't tell us otherwise, we're not going to add this to your plan, but here's some information should you be interested. So it's good to know how that's being handled, and probably if you're working with a third-party administrator, they're a little more proactive in making sure you have the right information to make those decisions.
Yeah, it's tough because I'm sorry, go ahead, Heather.
I apologize for interrupting. Before you moved on, there was a clarification need from our viewer. You had used the term leakage. And so the question is, could you please explain leakage? And is there a point where the employer should be worried that there's too much leaving the plan?
That's an excellent question. I appreciate you asking, because leakage is a term that we've used in the community, particularly Washington used that term quite a bit. Prior to the coronavirus outbreak, many people were concerned about retirement assets leaving the plan when a participant would move from one job to another. They would just cash out that money. That was the term that was used. Leakage was the term that was used for losing those retirement plan assets that weren't reinvested for a participant's retirement later on. There really is no legal problem or concern that one needs to have about allowing for the distribution. The concern would be just for the participant overall. If they just took the $100,000 because they have the ability to take a $100,000 distribution or loan, but don't necessarily have a need, they might be robbing themselves of a better future in retirement later on down the road. A lot of employers are struggling right now with the ability to make contributions. And if you have a safe harbor plan, you know that you are required to make certain contributions to the plan each year. It could be a basic safe harbor where you're required to make a matching contribution, or it could be one that you make a flat 3% non-elective contribution to all of your employees who are eligible. And the question we often receive is, I know that that's something I had to give my employees notice 30 days prior to the beginning of the plan year to put into place, but can I stop it in the middle of the plan year? It used to be that you could not stop a safe harbor contribution in the middle of the plan year. In 2009, when things were a little bit more challenging, the laws were changed, amended so that we could stop safe harbor contributions. So you can, in fact, suspend all types of safe harbor contributions now. It is important to understand that you have to give your employees at least 30-day notice, and the contributions have to be made up until the end of that 30-day period. So just by giving them a notice and stopping that safe harbor contribution isn't enough. You have to give them the notice, continue to make the contribution through that period, that 30-day period, and then you can suspend. But remember, if you suspend your safe harbor contribution, you will be subject to those non-discrimination tests that you tried to avoid by becoming a safe harbor plan. So regardless of whether or not you are a safe harbor plan in 2020, if you suspend it at any point in 2020, you're subject to those tests for all of 2020. So that's something really important to keep in mind. That's probably one of the more pressing questions that we get is, well, since I was a safe harbor for at least a few months, does that mean I don't have to be tested for that period of time? And the answer is you are tested for the entire year as if you were never a safe harbor plan once you suspend. I know many people have applied for and hopefully received some of the assets under the payroll protection program, or oftentimes called the PPP. When you applied for the PPP, one of the questions that you were asked was if you had made any safe harbor contributions or if you made any employer contributions to a retirement plan. And those assets were in fact covered or used to calculate the amount of your PPP check that you would receive. So in this particular question, the question is, can you use those assets that you received under the payroll protection program to make non-safe harbor contributions? And the answer is yes. Any retirement-related contribution, in fact, fees would also apply to a smaller degree, but any contributions that you make to a retirement plan would in fact be covered under the payroll protection program.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that clarification of the PPP. I know that quite a few clients were asking for specifics on what that money could be utilized for if they happen to be a happy recipient of some of those funds. But the reason I popped in, however, was for another question from our viewer. And so I'm going to back you up, not back you up a slide, but back you up a topic to give the viewers an overview of what a safe harbor plan is. If you can just explain that perhaps to a viewer who hasn't worked with retirement plans as much as the next guy.
Sure. So a safe harbor plan is essentially you're making a deal with Uncle Sam. What you're saying is there's certain compliance tests that must be performed each year. Those tests are essentially what we call the average deferral percentage test, meaning how much did the highly compensated employees of the company contribute of their own free will and choice, how much did they defer into the plan versus that of your non-highly compensated employees. And what the rule says generally is that the highly compensated cannot contribute more than 2% the average of the non-highly compensated employees. So if you have, let's just say that I'm an owner of the company and I make $100,000, that makes me a highly compensated employee. Those tests that apply would say that I can't put away more than 2% the average of my non-highly compensated employees. So if my employees of their own free will and choice only put away 2%, I can only put away 5%. And if I make $100,000, well, $5,000 is the maximum I would be able to put in. By becoming a safe harbor plan, you're saying, I'm willing to make a contribution to my employees. I'm guaranteeing I'm going to make a contribution to them in one of three ways in this year. And by doing so and making that contribution 100% vested, am I subject to these same discrimination rules that would prohibit me from making a large contribution to the plan? And the answer is not if you're a safe harbor plan. Once you become a safe harbor plan, you essentially those required tests are still performed, but you're not beholden to the results of those tests. So I could put away the maximum contribution, regardless of the amount my employees contribute. Hopefully that answers that. Hopefully that helped. If not, I'm happy to spend a little bit more time on that. So in terms of terminations and the difference between being furloughed and laid off and all kinds of questions that circle that, the big question is, how does that affect the plan overall? And what does that mean in terms of potentially being a partial plan termination? A partial plan termination is when greater than 20% of the workforce has been involuntarily laid off. If I have no intentions of replacing those individuals, and if it's not in the course of normal business for me, I've laid off more than 20% of my workforce, I am a partial plan termination. So the effect of that is that anyone who separates from service under the partial plan termination definition is 100% vested. So that's an important distinction to make. If you were relying on assets to come back to your forfeiture account, or were not aware by making this large separation of employment that it would create such a burden on the plan itself, or potential burden on the plan itself, by having to make all of those individuals 100% vested, that's really where people get a little frustrated, a little bit sideways with partial plan terminations. Doesn't mean that the plan itself is shut down. It just means that you've lost, as I said, greater than 20%, involuntarily laid off greater than 20% of your workforce. So that's one of those. It's one of those tricky ones that many people overlook. They don't realize that might pop up, and that might be something that they see. Sabrina, what do you think about the market? How do you feel about the market volatility?
It's been a very bumpy ride for sure. And I know that we're getting calls from employers wondering how they should guide their employees, and different actions that employees are looking to take include stopping contributions, reducing contributions, or even concerned about if they should become more conservative in their approach. And although I don't want to give any general investment recommendations, because really recommendations are going to be customized to each employee based on their own personal situation. For the most part, when the markets are volatile, new contributions are getting the advantage of the volatility. That is, when the markets go down, you're buying investments at lower cost. So those that are still fully employed and on track for retirement, for the most part, should probably try to continue their contributions. As far as the type of investments, you need to be careful about becoming too conservative, because in essence, what you may be doing is selling investments at a market low, and statements do relay what the best price is that you can get at any given time, and really your true ownership, or your participants' true ownership, is the units that they're buying, and they're buying more units at lower prices for new money going in. I do want to kind of go back to distributions, because this also plays into should they take a distribution related to the CARES Act and their situation. And that's money that's, instead of buying low, is being pulled out of the market, and as Joe referred to, subject to leakage. And in essence, we're finding that employees that feel confident about their financial situation, including their retirement readiness, are generally more engaged in their work, because they're not stressing over their financial situation. So it's usually in everybody's best interest to help employees. Remember, the CARES Act distributions are very specific, and they are allowed, whether it be the distribution or the loan, for individuals, workers that are experiencing COVID-19. And I think we might have a phone that needs to be muted. I hear some background. And then there's an allowance for, so either the individual is experiencing the illness associated with COVID-19, or their spouse is experiencing the illness with COVID-19. And the other piece of that is that they have a financial hardship directly due to COVID-19. And Joe, I'm going to ask you a question on this one, so be prepared. So, and my understanding so far in reading these rules about the the allowance under the financial hardship is either that the hours were cut for that participant so they're not working as much, or they were laid off, or they are having to stay at home specifically because they don't have childcare, and so therefore they're having to stop work in order to attend to kids or something specific to their financial hardship. And I also heard that if their spouse is laid off, that is not an allowance under the financial hardship. Have you heard anything along those lines, Joe?
Yeah, I have. In fact, there's one key word. I think it's going to be the word of 2020 outside of COVID-19, and it's quarantined. And that's a very broad definition. So if you are quarantined, which I think many of us are, we're home, and some of us might feel stuck and maybe a little antsy, but if you are quarantined, it also does fall under that categorization, and you are then subject to what they call a QI, or a qualified individual. So as you outlined, a qualified individual are those components that you just, those key definitions that you just outlined. If you have a spouse who's laid off, or have somebody that a significant other who is laid off, that doesn't necessarily mean that you might sustain that financial need. Although what's really important to understand is that it is a self-certification. So if a participant declares under that self-certification article that they have experienced hardship, and that could be because of somebody, a spouse, or somebody else who has who you rely on has created that financial hardship.
So there's three questions, and I think that we probably have time for all three. So if you don't mind, and I don't know which one of you would like to take this question, so you both can stay on and do it. But the question reads, if an employer adopts the CARES Act loan distribution provisions, what is their obligation to communicate those options to plan participants? A follow-up to that would be, what are your thoughts regarding the message that should be communicated to those participants?
I might jump in initially on this one. I know that the messaging that I've read so far, prepared by the different investment companies, seem to indicate that that you can borrow up to $100,000, almost implying that you should borrow the full $100,000. And really, the messaging should be that it's available to participants to satisfy their need, their financial hardship, and their need right now. The loans don't require that you have a financial hardship, but that would be the messaging. So we're internally drafting some more language that implies the need. The other part of the loans is to make sure that you're communicating distribution options to your employees. And most importantly, if you're not doing that, and those that are highly compensated, like Joe was alluding to, or owners of the company, are leveraging tools that they're not communicating to their employees, it can look like they're discriminating. So it's important that if anybody's going to use it, that everybody know that they have that availability. Joe?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. When the plan is amended, once the amendments are prepared and the participants at that point, they'll receive what's called a summary material modification, or a notice that comes along with the plan document to let them know that there was a change made to the plan. But long before that, either your third-party administrator or the record keeper investment company you work with will provide you with some notification to give to those participants. Even if you decided to opt out of the program, there's some communication that you may want to share as well.
Got it. Thank you both for that. And then the next question is about layoffs. So I left the slide up here. If employees are laid off, will the plan be subject to partial plan termination? But right after you finished that, Joe, a question came in saying if someone is furloughed, nothing changes. Is that correct? And I'm going to make an assumption there from that viewer that because the employment relationship hasn't been severed, so everything just rides through with the exception of payroll during that furlough. Is that correct?
That's right. So furlough meaning that you fully anticipate bringing those participants back. It's definitely something temporary. There is complete intention of bringing the participants back, and so nothing would change. There would be no, they would not meet the definition of partial plan termination.
Right, got it. And Sabrina, I know you just ducked off again, but you can't hide. We're on a webinar and there's only 3 of us, for goodness sake. And so come on back, because I believe this question was directed specifically to something you had said, because you addressed the market volatility and, you know, now's the good time to allocate funds when some are lower than they ought. But the question reads, regarding current contributions, is now the time to change how those contributions are being allocated? So, right, so, you know, forget about the loss that you took, you know, over the last 3 weeks, but for any new contributions coming in, should employees be looking at changing those allocations? And I recognize, and I'm sure the viewer recognizes that you might not be able to specifically address that question, but what are your thoughts or suggestions for the employee who's curious about that?
I would say in the perfect world, with a long time horizon before retirement, so 10 years or more is what I define as long time horizon, you would want to take advantage of the market volatility by investing more in stocks, a more aggressive approach. So, and it's kind of interesting because participants, when there's market volatility, as we saw in 2008 and 2001, want to conserve their dollars that are going in. They're more worried about that, and there's this inclination to want to put it in money market. Well, this is definitely not the time to be doing that, because you're getting the advantage of like going into a store and everything is 50% off. Well, you want to purchase more at that point in time. So it might be a good time to take your current money going into the market and being a little more aggressive. I have to caveat that with saying, you know, I can't promise future returns, and it may be another year before we come out of this and we start to see the market turn around. So in the meantime, those dollars are buying lower, but your account will look lower, and you just have to know how to handle that. And remember that it's important to understand what risk category you fall into. That's oftentimes why we do risk quizzes, so that you're not taking on more volatility than you can emotionally handle.
Right, right. So I've got one more question. This one actually comes, yesterday we had a webinar specifically on the CARES Act and how it is affecting group health. And one of the questions from the audience was, if someone had not chosen to participate in their group health plan, now given the COVID pandemic, could they enter even though it wasn't open enrollment? And so I wonder if the same thing applies for wealth management, retirement plans. If someone had chose not to participate in their employer's wealth management plan or retirement plan, could they now, during this pandemic, pretend that it's open enrollment and rethink those decisions?
No, not at this point. If your plan has a quarterly entry, or if it has a semi-annual entry, and you elected not to enter the plan on the last open enrollment, you still have to wait at this point for that next enrollment to come up. We don't have any guidance that would suggest otherwise at this point.
Got it. All right. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that. So I am going to say my housekeeping and my goodbyes, but then I'll disable my camera, and then I would just encourage you, Joe, and you, Sabrina, to say your goodbyes. Just disable your camera when you're done saying your goodbyes. Go one at a time, clearly. But other than that, I want to thank you both for being with us. And for our viewers here this morning, or if you're watching us on playback, I'd like to thank you for giving us your time and your talent and trusting Joe and Sabrina with the information they've offered here today. You can always visit thestrivegroup.com for future programming. As a reminder, we do these every weekday, same time, same place. If you have any ideas for future topics, feel free to email me at info@thestrivegroup.com, and I will reach out and into my network and find an expert that can handle 28 minutes of questions. So don't hesitate to do that. I encourage you all to have a positive attitude and be patient with your kids and be patient with your colleagues. We're all in uncharted territory at this time, and the more we can strive to be positive, the better off we'll all be. So with that, I'll say my goodbyes. And so up on the slide now is information about Joe and Sabrina. So we've got 2 companies represented with these 2 experts today. One of them is the Wilson Albers company, an Alera group affiliate, if you will, and then pension plan specialist. So Joe's with the latter and Sabrina is with the former. And I'll leave it to you to say your goodbyes, but I can't thank you enough for giving us 30 minutes of your time today and helping us put together the frequently asked questions that are on your clients and our viewers' minds. So with that, I will bid you adieu.
Well,
Okay,
I
I'll
guess
jump in first.
Go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead,
And
Sabrina.
as a retirement plan specialist and a fiduciary advisor, retirement plans are close to my heart, and financial success of the employees as well as the company is important. Any questions, please reach out. Be safe, and I appreciate everybody's attendance today. That's all.
Well, Sabrina and Heather, it's been wonderful to join you today. It's as somebody who is quarantined and has been for a very long time, this has been a great pleasure for me to do this. And I love the positive focus of this whole experience today. So thank you for letting me be a part of this. If I can help in any way, if there's questions after the fact, feel free to reach out to me. We're always happy to answer any questions in this time of uncertainty and support in any way we can. So thank you again for letting us be a part of this, and enjoy the rest of your day.